Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's session. We'll now begin today's discussion. So today we'll be discussing the future of healthcare. My name is Nick, and I'll be your host for today's session. My role at 500 is helping to drive expansion and partnerships throughout APEC for the ecosystems team. And if you have any questions throughout this session, feel free to use the chat function in the Zoom app. You're also welcome to send over questions to us after the discussion too, which we'd be happy to answer. So at the beginning, we will give a brief introduction of 500 startups. Then we will discuss a curated set of predictions for the future of healthcare, and we will then begin our exciting discussion with our panel of speakers. So to begin with 500 startups, our mission essentially is to uplift people and economies through entrepreneurship. We have been fortunate to see our mission's importance come to life now more than ever during these very challenging times. We have been working with companies, cities, nations around the world to run entrepreneurship and innovation activities to help them maintain economic relevance, to diversify the economic base, and create new sustainable opportunities of growth. 500 Startups currently ranks as the #1 most active early stage investor in the world. For the past decade, we have been building an incredible global network of founders, investors, universities, foundations, and corporates that have enabled us to achieve these remarkable results. We have over 2,500 companies in our portfolio, which is growing daily. We have perfected the art and science of startup selection and investment. We review over 10,000 companies per year and typically only invest in 1% to 2% of them. As of now, we have investments in over 78 countries. We have a committed capital exceeding $600 million. We have a founder network of over 5,000 individuals. We have an extensive vetted expert mentor network. And our portfolio of companies comprises 19 unicorns and also 19 centaurs. In regards to industry focus and expertise, we've truly invested across all major sectors. The only common thread is that they're all tech-powered and they're all tech-enabled. It's also worth highlighting that we have nearly 300 companies in the AI, robotics, and digital healthcare space, representing over 65 countries. Having worked in many different industries, we have discovered a very interesting fact, and that is that startups, regardless of sector or industry, experience many similar pains and challenges. Fortunately, with 500 startups, we have ended up basically compiling an interesting ecosystem perspective and framework for how we think about this. Through years of experience, we have basically shown, and various interviews, we have essentially identified 6 key elements or tools for what makes a very much a thriving startup ecosystem. One of these has to do with strategy. This is all about creating direction, alignment, and commitment around the vision for an ecosystem. This is about understanding what needs to be activated and created to make an ecosystem thrive. Second has to do with investment. This is about establishing, attracting, and managing or advancing existing investments. Investments are essentially the fuel to jumpstart and boost the startup ecosystem. Thirdly, we've ended up talking about platform. This is all about essentially attracting the key stakeholders to make an ecosystem operate well. This includes local investors, startups themselves, and individual talent, academics, advisors, mentors, and more. The platform is essentially the structure that is built to advance the ecosystem and create a cohesive message and house the initiative. Education is all about training and developing the entrepreneurs, investors, and corporates. Education supports the acceleration and sustainable development of entrepreneurs, investors, and corporates. Furthermore, with corporates, this is all about essentially how corporates engage with the ecosystem through investing, acquiring, partnering, or buying products and services from startups. Corporates help to activate and advance the ecosystem's value chain, building greater financial autonomy and sustainability. And lastly, we will talk about government. Government provides the incentive, the policy support, and partnership for an integrated partnership to drive and sustain the ecosystem. Now, in terms of 500 startups, we essentially view ourselves as a global innovation platform. We have over 10 years of experience. We have run more than 60 startup programs around the world. We operate in over 15 countries. We have an incredible mentor network around the world of over 340 individuals. And of course, we have an extremely rigorous acceptance process for the investments we make in our portfolios, and also for the acceptance of startups into the various different startup programs we run around the world. Now, in terms of how we actually do help corporates, there are many, our capabilities are very broad and deep. Essentially, there's many ways we end up helping corporates drive their own innovation and venturing activities. We've done things including global insight sessions to raise awareness about the emerging technologies and business models happening. We've run startup programs that have included early stage startups to more mature and growth startups to help them access new markets. We've helped with CVCs in terms of helping to define an investment thesis, getting the team together, and ending up basically helping on the execution of that. We've helped run proof of concept programs to basically essentially run experiments between a startup and a corporate to create a new value offering. We've also executed entrepreneurship programs, which is essentially creating a pathway to help corporates build and create new revenue streams and new products and services. We've also helped and executed startup sourcing programs to identify highly relevant startups to work with corporates in a synergistic fashion. Now, to kickstart basically the conversation we have today, which is about the future of healthcare, there are, of course, many interesting healthcare trends accelerating today, and there are many predictions for the future. And it's hard to really give it justice just in terms of the amount of time we have today. However, as part of this introduction to the talk today, we will take a peek into the future of healthcare from a patient standpoint. So again, to really just get the imagination flowing, we curated 4 different and distinctive predictions of how things might be 10 years from now. The first one has to do with interfacing. Essentially, today's interfaces are becoming much more popular and is an accelerating trend for basically helping with monitoring healthcare and also driving treatments. And this continues to have huge potential to improve. Even today, I wear my Fitbit on a regular basis to constantly monitor my own health activities. In the future, it's a big wonder how far wearable technology will continue to emerge in itself, and if even implantable technology will emerge, such as brain-machine interfaces. As radical as it sounds, that could be something that essentially helps improve restoring and extending human capabilities. A second prediction relates to surgery. Today, there are certain procedures carried out by robots, such as bladder or kidney removal. However, there are many procedures that are still performed by humans. 10 years from now, the question is open to whether operating theaters would only comprise robots and how much that would radically improve the outcome of surgeries. A third prediction relates to data. Essentially, in many other industries, there is this concept of a digital twin to recreate virtual replicas of a system. This is a powerful tool for industries such as aerospace or architecture to make accurate predictions. And it's something that has a lot of power in the healthcare industry, where some wonder if that can be used to make radical healthcare predictions about a patient. A fourth curated prediction relates to pharmaceuticals. Essentially, there is an advancement of many leading technologies now, and there is a prediction there will be a harmonious convergence, essentially, with CRISPR gene editing, artificial intelligence, and next generation DNA sequencing, which could radically improve the development of medicinal drugs. So to just take a closer look at each one of these and their implications, in regards to interfacing, there is a prediction that there could eventually be essentially implants, which would provide a high bandwidth connection between the brain and computers, which would have profound implications. One venture that is currently emboldening on that is Neuralink. On the medical front, this could introduce incredible healthcare solutions such as restoring motor and sensory functionality. And furthermore, it could be an interface to provide treatment to neurological disorders such as Alzheimer's. Ultimately, this type of device has applications far beyond the scope of healthcare, which of course we will save for another conversation. Regarding surgery, I think that this was neatly summarized by a doctor named Penny Dash, where when she talked about essentially how she imagined the operating theater in 2030, she quipped that she thinks these, referring to her hands and figures, will be seen as illegal instruments. She predicts that instead of, we will actually just use robots completely in the operating theater, which will provide a far more precise way and also a way to significantly reduce damage to surrounding tissues, reduce invasive surgery techniques, and also significantly shorter lengths of stay in the hospital. In regards to this digital twins concept, a doctor from the University of Heidelberg predicts that essentially that if we can actually create actual digital twins and simulations of patients' organs, fully of their cellular functions, and in all of its complexity, we would be able to make incredibly powerful predictions about a patient, whether a patient will become ill, how they would react to a certain type of therapy, and also essentially how they would react to certain medicine, which would provide the greatest benefit. And lastly, in regards to our fourth curated prediction, which relates to drug development, there is the idea that essentially 3 of today's leading technologies, next generation DNA sequencing, artificial intelligence, and CRISPR gene editing will converge, where essentially we can basically create new cures to chronic conditions, we can radically reduce drug development rates, and we can significantly shorten drug development timelines. So now that we have that preamble, the curated set of predictions, I'd like to introduce 3 speakers for today's conversation. Our first speaker is Andrew Schill, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of SenzeHub. Our second speaker is Jerry Chen, who's the founder and CEO of Grenavi. And our third speaker is Sergey Jakimov, who is the co-founder and CEO of Longenesis. Now, they will do a much better job of basically giving an introduction about their ventures in the healthcare space, so I will pass the mic off to them.
Great, thanks, Nick. I guess I'm up first. Yeah, so yes, I'm Andrew. I'm the CMO of SenzeHub. So if you just want to go to the next slide, sorry. Yeah, so what we do here is we're an IoT platform company, actually. So we actually have a remote monitoring wearable device that monitors health vitals and is essentially an early detection system. So we monitor and track 3 major health vitals: heart rate, body temperature, and your blood oxygen saturation. Next. Right. So you're probably saying like, oh, that's nothing special. My Apple Watch or can do that. So what the problem that we're really solving in the enterprise space at least is being able to detect and respond to early deterioration of health vitals rather than just waiting for emergencies to strike. And so rather than pairing with, say, your mobile device, what we actually do is what makes us really different is that we're able to track large populations simultaneously, actually up to 30,000. So essentially data, your vital information is being transferred from your device in between thousands of nodes into a gateway and then into a master dashboard. And so this has a number of different implications for how hospitals can manage their staff, and also, of course, treat patients that need care the most. And so we've deployed out, even though we've had hospitals originally in mind, we've deployed it in nursing homes and as well as in some government agencies as well. Now, the other use case that we're working on at the same time is actually for those that are aging in place, and this is because we know that most people, especially seniors, they are not in nursing homes. In fact, more than 90% live out, or living at home alone or with their families. So we've actually adapted our enterprise solution. We've scaled it down, and it's really made, and we've adapted it for seniors living at home. So there's two versions. One is also through a gateway, then it's transferred to several different caregivers, people like you and me, or to, say, your physicians, or to your neighbors or friends and family. There's also a if you say, for example, don't have a Wi-Fi connection at home, your mobile device can actually then work as a gateway. An important distinction to make here is that it's between users and our customers. The users are actually are going to be patients or seniors living at home, whereas the customers in our mind is really either the nursing homes or hospitals, or, like I said, like you or me, the family and caregivers. Okay, next. Right, and so I think probably where we're going with all of this is trying to create a much more holistic solution. And like I said, we are an IoT platform company. So even though we have a wearable device, that's really just the starting point in our mind. So what we're looking at doing is actually to, in the next few years, have a wrapper of products and services that we're going to add on to by working with a number of different partners as part of our platform. So we're working with research institutes down here in Singapore to help predict illnesses. We're also going to be looking at, say, certain products and services for your daily necessities while living at home, and of course, tying that all together with, say, other healthcare services like telemedicine. So it's really end-to-end and built around your parents, your grandparents, and the family. Okay, I think that's it on my side. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great. This seems like our part. Hi everyone. My name is Sergey. I happen to be the CEO and the co-founder of Longenesis. Can you flip to the next slide, please? So I'll actually start with the snapshot on Longenesis and where we are. So we are a company that is now 2 years old. So we were founded in 2018. We're currently present in Asia, Middle East, and EU. We're slowly crawling into US and landing the first clients there, but sort of Asia is where we started. We actually started out of Hong Kong as our HQ. And our current data reach, and we're dealing with data, we're dealing with helping sponsors and pharmaceutical companies worldwide identify the potential clinical trial cohorts faster and without borders. So our current data reach is more than 1 million patients now. And what we have been doing, we have been partnering with patient organizations, biopharma, and hospitals around the world and across several continents. Recently also going into the COVID data curation space, which we're now doing for multiple governments. But in order for all of this to make sense to you, I would like to flip to the next slide and sort of tell what we do, essentially. So at Longenesis, we do what we call compliant borderless patient identification and digital study enrollment. Next slide. Now, when creating the company, our motivation was very simple. Our team has been working with pharmaceutical, medical device, and clinical data industries for quite a while. All of our team members sort of have captured all these different angles of the healthcare industry. So the issue that we saw, all of us, was, well, the inability of biopharma or any other entities that are essentially sponsoring clinical trials or getting drugs to the market or getting medical devices certified. So inability of these so-called study sponsors to efficiently tap into the data resources that were there in the hospitals or any other patient organizations or all the entities that have aggregated patient or data reach in order to speed up the clinical trial process, right? So speed up recruitment, speed up patient onboarding, speed up patient engagement. Now, so at Longenesis, we basically imagined our own end-to-end approach of how you can use minimally invasive, in terms of data and privacy, minimally invasive methods of letting the data publishers or clinical institutions the opportunity to showcase or advertise, quote unquote, their data access and their patient access in a centralized way, and then compliantly enroll patients into studies. So Longenesis created its own ecosystem, which consists of two products, Longenesis Curator and Longenesis Themis, where Longenesis Curator is basically a data dashboard that aggregates anonymized metadata metrics from the partner clinical institutions worldwide, where these act as data publishers. The solution is fully institution-centric, so that hospitals or any other patient organizations are essentially in control of what type of anonymized metadata they are showcasing to the sponsor community. Sponsors, Curator transforms this data into fully queryable formats, and sponsors can essentially accomplish in 10 minutes, accomplish what they would be doing in 2 or 3 months. And that is shortlisting a patient cohort from anywhere in the world and requesting the access to it directly from the data publishers, directly from the clinical institutions. Now, once Curator has done its job and initiated this first sort of collaborative handshake, we will deploy our second product with hospitals, and that is Longenesis Themis. And Themis is our own in-house built consent management tool, which allows data publishers to fully digitally enroll patients into trials. It is regionally compliant. It is sort of fine-tunable on the go in terms of the consent agreements, in terms of the relevant procedures that you need to follow according to the legislation. All in all, this here allows to shave off up to 70 to 80% actually of recruitment times in any clinical trial, and speeds up the drug development. Now, our big ambition here is we are now at more than 1 million disease-specific patient reach. Our big ambition is finalizing this year with 2 million, next year with 10 million. And what we are up for is essentially redefining how clinical data is shared non-invasively and compliantly to speed up the clinical work processes, as well as being able to satisfy, pretty much up to 70%, fully satisfy up to 70% of clinical recruitment requests that are coming through Longenesis, and being able to identify, up to 70% of patient cohorts that are needed by sponsors. So yeah, I mean, we are here trying to redefine how we use clinical data to speed up drug development.
Thank you, Sergey. That's fascinating. Thank you, Sergey and Andrew, for both of these introductions to your ventures. Jerry, would you mind walking us through your venture?
Sure. Well, do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
We are Grenavi. I'm Jerry Chen. We are from Taiwan. Grenavi was founded in 2015, and we have 29 people. We are a startup in Taiwan. During these 6 years, we have already 20 patents granted, and we have another 31 patents ongoing. I myself is a surgeon and also a PhD in biomedical engineer, and I'm a Stanford fellow, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I had a startup IPO already in Taiwan. Our technique is called a smart platform. Now it stands for service mapping auto registration technique. So it is used to mapping the real body to the CT, MRI, and others. So we can do that in seconds. So that would be very precise and very fast. So with our technique, we developed several projects. First is the nasal swab robot. That is, we're doing that for this pandemic. And we have already a now track system that is an autopilot neurosurgical navigation robot to do the neurosurgery, especially for brain, more precisely and easier. Our first product is actually the Now Track. It's a brain surgical robot, and I can show you a small video here to see how it works. To combine with robotic technique and AI and computer visions, so the robot will find the patient by itself. And then after finding the patient, it will register the patient's location with CT and MRI in seconds to merge all the data autonomously. So it will be very fast and easy to use. And then we can also synchronize the data such like the different functional area of the brain. So the doctors can discuss with the patient more easier. And after the doctor making the decision, the robot will do the rest for them. So it will enter your brain very precisely and delicately to the target that the doctor wants. And so it can be used in a lot of kind of surgeries. And also with the same technique platform, we developed a nasal swab robot because we know that medical doctors are risking their life, but actually for the last 20 years, medical doctors still doing the same thing, such like a nasal swab. They're doing the old way, the old-fashioned way. So it's we really didn't use technique to help them during the pandemic. So we have to see. Actually, it is already changed a lot in industry, but medical doctors, they are the highest technique and highest knowledge people, but they are doing the same way that 20 years ago. Is actually not very smart. So we developed a nasal swab robot, and it is actually the first and the only nasal swab robot that were issued an EUA by a local government right now. And this is how it works. It is the robot, such like the brain surgical robots, it will recognize your nose by a small nasal clip, and it will identify your anatomical structures. So we will know where, not only where your nostril is, but also the length from your nose to your ear. And that is actually the length, that the depth that the CDC suggested for nasal swab robot, nasal swab. So after doing the facial recognition, you will see that the robot is right now going to the patient's face by itself and controlled by a personnel standing behind a protection shield holder. And then the swab will go into your nose very easily and delicately and slowly. And after going to your nasal cavity, it will rotate it to the angle that is directly parallel to your palate. So it will directly go into your nasal pharynx area and without any, without any different angle. So it will be very precise every time. So if you receive a nasal swab before, if the nurses or doctors are not well trained, it somehow will go to other place and very, very painful. But with our robot, with the clinical trial evidence that the pain score actually is much more less than humans. So it will be more delicately and more precisely. And we combine with testing tools such like the Roche Mini PCR or iSensor's antigens test. So we can provide a total solution that from swabbing to the PCR report within 25 minutes. So you don't have to wait 6 hours or 2 days. You can have the PCR report in 25 minutes. And it has been used in 3 hospitals in Taiwan, and more than 5 hospitals are talking with us, become our clients. And it is an ideal situation for large-scale testing, not only in airlines, tourists, or in some other companies, so they can protect their employees and prevent the gathering the infection during the company or industries. So we provide also a medical trunk for the areas that they may need this kind of solution, mobile, so you can put in anywhere, such like the park, the airports, or other areas. So that's our briefly introduction. So we're doing the the robotic technique, and we use our smart platform to do a lot of surgeries. And in the future, I think we can do not only the brain surgery and nasal swab, but also others. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry, for that introduction. That was fascinating. Those videos are visceral. I thought when I saw the video of the robot about to connect with the brain, I felt my brain light up, and same with the swab with the nose. Those are incredible. So thank you for everyone for sharing those introductions. So we'll start the discussion off with a question for everyone here to answer. Again, this is basically meant to be a discussion, really some radical predictions of where we think we might be in certain areas 10 years from now. So to get started, there is let's consider healthcare through 3 categories of patient activities: prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. Over the next 10 years, which category do you believe will see the biggest improvement in patient outcomes, and what innovation do you predict will drive it? Jerry, perhaps you can start off.
Yeah, I myself is a surgeon. Actually, for a doctor, I think for prevention part, actually it's difficult because people usually don't care prevention. However, I think for the early diagnostic part, that will be a very possible way. For my view, I think the most improvement will be happen in early diagnosis, because a lot of images or a lot of such like low dose CT for lung cancers, that is a change in the last 10 years. I think in the future, a lot of things like that will happen. So I think for me, the early diagnosis, especially for images part, will be a very good chance.
Fascinating. Yeah, I also wonder with that, given the role artificial intelligence is playing in terms of how far that will go in being able to successfully diagnose various patients. Sergey, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, you see, Nick, my thoughts are mixed. I'm a big fan myself of the so-called P4 sector, right? So predictive, preventative, personalized participatory medicine, which is sort of a separate part of the biopharma R&D now. I would say that if you look at the trends that we're seeing, and with big pharma, with clinical trials, et cetera, the next big thing would be not treating the disease, but rather preventing the disease from happening, right? So that is the art right there, preventing the disease altogether. But I would actually supplement what you said with the fourth category, and for the sake of simplicity, let's call it reversive, right? So some sort of reversive medicine, and that is essentially trying to reverse certain processes that are associated with our body and that are then associated with certain diseases. Because what we are seeing is sort of with reversive medicine, we're seeing tremendous efforts with immune activation, with epigenetics, with senescent cell therapies, right? So these are things that are there essentially that will be there in the market in the next 10 years, and that are aimed at preventing certain processes that are happening or reversing certain processes that are happening with our body. I mean, the company, I'll try to sort of shoot some examples. The company that I'm most fascinated with in terms of oncology, for example, is ALX Oncology, right? So these guys are doing essentially immune activation for anti-cancer agents, right? So what they have learned to do is how to teach your body to start attacking cancer cells, right? And that is reversing basically a potentially hazardous process there. The other trend is let's say the Cleara biotech, right? Combating senescent cells. And that is again trying to get rid of the cells that would then lead to certain processes and certain sort of potentially terminal outcomes. So that's on the invasive part. Like coming back to your question, I think that my out of 3, mine would be preventive medicine, and preventive medicine achieved through harnessing the power of data, right? So all the drug discovery platforms, all these sort of streamlining of drug discovery, using AI for designing molecules for different purposes. I think that's by far the future, and this is how you could sort of predict and react to challenges much faster in healthcare. So that will be my take.
Thanks, Sergey, that's great. I also liked your addition about being able to reverse certain processes, and it makes me have to ask, what do you think then about Aubrey de Grey's work on trying to solve aging through reversing some of that process? Does that seem realistic, or is that seem too far-fetched?
I do actually think that, I mean, this is where the debate goes into the longevity industry in general, right? So I do actually happen to have quite a bit of affiliation with the longevity industry through our work, and there is a lot of misconception about longevity. Like, people think about, you know, things that Aubrey is doing or Alex Javrenkov from Silico is doing, for example, as, you know, designing magic pills that would make you live 50 years longer. That's not exactly the case, right? So the whole longevity thing is about trying to prevent certain processes, and by preventing certain processes, that would make you live longer and healthier life, right? So it's about increasing the healthy lifespan. So what Aubrey is doing, he is essentially targeting you know, certain processes that would allow for local rejuvenation techniques, right? So he's targeting certain processes and certain methods that would allow your cells to be restored in a way, right? Or be brought back to their original operation. And this is not black magic, right? So this is normal. And that is something that will be there in conventional therapies in the next 10 years. So I think Aubrey is completely conventional if you look at his work specifically, right? And from the depth of it, he might be perceived as a bit of a, you know, as a bit of a futurist, but he's not actually. Like, he is talking about the future for medicine, and that is repairing certain things in the body rather than, you know, trying to get rid of them or just letting them be.
Great, thanks for that, Sergey. And Andrew, back to the original question. So what are your thoughts then? Which sort of category of patient activities will see the biggest improvement in the next 10 years, and what do you predict will be the innovation that drives it?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone raised really good points, and I can see probably where, you know, especially, you know, what Jerry had said about, you know, being able to diagnose cancer early on. You know, that's gonna, I mean, we're already seeing that with projects at Google and Microsoft. You know, it's getting, you know, they're making leaps and bounds in doing that quite successfully. But, you know, probably you know, maybe I'm a little biased, but I think probably it's going to be within prevention. And kind of just to add on to what Sergey was saying, you know, what the trends that we're looking at is, you know, what we're anticipating is that people are going to be living longer, which is true. I mean, if you think about, you know, just even in the 1950s, around that time, the average lifespan was probably with around, you know, 50s or 60s. Now we're in the, you know, average lifespans around the 70s. So we're definitely anticipating that people is going to, you know, where people are going to live to a centenarian age, where that's not going to be uncommon. I think one of the biggest, so before I get to that, but so I think it's going to be about, you know, how to monitor and how to, you know, the health conditions of while we age, and what does that look like, so we can maintain, say, an active aging lifestyle. Right. So I think one of the biggest drivers for us to be able to do that successfully, from a technology standpoint, is 5G, and of course with AI too, right? Because remote monitoring, in particular, that technology has not really reached its full potential yet. I mean, the networks today are really quite slow, very unreliable, and so, you know, we're not able to successfully, you know, monitor, large populations or individuals to the depth that we need to. So that's going to then have a number. Once 5G becomes much more, once it becomes pervasive, that's going to have massive implications. One, of course, the obvious one is going to be with the expansion of telemedicine type services. But I think also with the collection and sharing and ingestion of medical data as well. Right, really how to combine all of these kind of very disparate sources of data and identify very interesting but seemingly tenuous relationships and extracting very meaningful information from them, which is it's kind of surprising that we're not already there, because healthcare, the industry itself, is probably has some of the largest data sets in the world, but but from a technical standpoint, it's actually really quite backwards. In the States, at least, they still use fax machines. I think it's probably the last industry that still uses fax machines, because even though we have all these innovations that are coming up with automation, AI, 5G, sensor technology, etc., the regulatory environment hasn't been able to keep up, right? The healthcare institutions themselves have not been able to keep up. So even though we have all these kind of really great things happening, we also have to recognize that it's also the environment that needs to conform and to enable for these types of innovations to flourish.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, to your point on data, that just does, I find, to be so the opportunity for improvement there just seems so glaring. I am amazed with certain industries, whether it's communications or e-commerce, how transparent and in sync the information is across stakeholders, but it remains so disparate in the healthcare industry. So now I do have a few questions for each of you individually that is relevant to the ventures you are building. Jerry, to start off with you and to tie back to this prediction about robots in the operating theater in 2030, what is your sense of how surgeries will be managed in 2030, and how will the job of the surgeon evolve by then? Hi, Jerry, your microphone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that for medical surgeons, especially for the one they used to be doing things by their own hands, they have to face the reality that actually robots and the high techs are really go into the operation rooms. So you can imagine that within 10 years, I think more than half of the surgery will be done by robots. Maybe not the total fully automatically, but it has to be by robots partially or something. So I think that is the trend, and no way to come back. You already see that a lot of hospitals has already adopted the robots, such like Da Vinci kind of robots. It is already been in the market for more than 10 years. But that is actually the first step. I think for these kind of robots, such like Da Vinci or others, most of them are remote control robots. So actually, it still copy the medical doctor's skills. They still, the medical doctor control the process, control the procedure, and it only copy or remote control the machine to do the operation for them. But with the improvement of techniques, that more and more robots can do more precisely, or they can, because of the technique. So some procedures that usually doctors cannot do, that will be replaced by the robot. Such that if you want to have a small lesion less than 1 millimeter or less than 2 millimeters, you want to ablate the tumor, it's difficult for you to do that, especially it's underneath some tissues. But with the technique right now, or in the future, we can identify the tumor behind the tissues. So it can identify it with very minimal invasive needles to ablate, such like with lasers, with RFA, or with cryotherapies. So I think in the future that the doctors may have to face that the procedure they learned before will change tremendously. That will change, and we will get used to have a minimal invasive, such like with needles or some other tools to treat cancers or treat other diseases such like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Well, I think that will be totally different. So robots is already in the operation room, but it is just the beginning. In the next 10 years, there will be a lot of specific robots that doing specific procedures to help medical doctors. I think that is the future I see. Yeah.
Great. And just to get clarity, when you said 50% of surgeries you thought might be conducted by robots, that is 50% would be autonomous robots, as in it is not a human controlling the process in real time?
Oh, well, I think maybe I think at least I think within the next 10 years, maybe not automatically, but for robots such like Da Vinci, it's not an autonomous robot. It's a robot that controlled by a human. And some robots such as our robots for brain tumors, that I think that is you monitor the process, but you don't interrupt actually to the process. That is a kind of autonomous, or you just monitor the process, because that is too precise for a human to do the process within 2 millimeters. So I think that is a kind of change. I think not only brain tumor or such like, you can imagine that for such that if in the future, if you have a small liver cancer or small lung cancer, you don't have to have a 3 holes for laparoscopy to identify or to resect part of the lung or part of the liver. You just use a robot to place a needle directly to the lesion and then apply energy such like laser or RFA, and the tumor is gone. So that would be this kind of situation. So I think many procedures will be instead of resections or instead of opening, it will be a kind of needle operations by robots. That would be the trend. Yeah, that would be the trend. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. That's great. Sergey, so back to this question of data. It is widely understood that data is not being effectively used in the healthcare industry. What do you predict will be the most radical innovation in terms of using data to most improve patient outcomes within the next 10 years?
Right. So look, the challenge here is it is very easy to to be a visionary in terms of how data should be used or should not be used. You should though embrace certain reality, like given things in reality that we have right now. I mean, the first one that you have is, I think the Gates Foundation was the one that told that this was the $1 trillion question, but even without Gates Foundation, it is, and that is the data interoperability. This is something that Andrew has started to elaborate on, right? So this is a situation when one hospital can have 10 plus EMR systems that do not communicate to each other, right? And this is where this hospital is essentially doomed in terms of any sort of interoperability and any sort of data exports that then can be used by third party to predict outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we're essentially looking at tons of clinical institutions, right? So dozens, hundreds, thousands around the world that do have their data sets very fragmented and very siloed across these institutions, right? So that is one thing. The other thing is from the other end, from the industrial end, you see the drift that is sort of dictated by 2 major streams. Well, one stream is regulatory, right? So patients are in control, right? So patient centricity is the king, and patients should be able to control who sees the data, who uses the data, et cetera, right? So we're essentially coming to the point where everything should be very transparently consented and very transparently audited in terms of all the relevant permissions that a patient, he or she, gave for the data usage. Now, from the other end, This is supplemented by the industry, being big pharma, meaning big CROs, saying, well, the retrospective data that is there in the hospitals just won't dig anymore, right? So what you need to have is you need to have the way of how to harvest, pretty much harvest, large amounts of so-called RWD, real world data, right? And that should come from patients. So the trick here is like combining these drifts of, staying very patient-centric, but then at the same time being able to combine retrospective data, meaning clinical or any other, whatever phenotypic, with prospective data that you have generated on demand, right? And this is where the challenge essentially is. So first and foremost, the future is with the solutions that are able to respect the data stays local principle. So there should not be any data ingestion happening by third parties, and that will be your compliance with the regulation. But at the same time, be able to engage patients on the personal level and to generate additional data from patients, starting from basic things like questionnaires, ending up with clinical data on demand, right? And this is something where all the big CROs and all the big pharma in their prospective research are looking at. Now, the second thing is, continuing the discussion on the data stays local principle, the next big thing is, of course, federated learning, right? So federated learning is something that all the big companies in the field, all the big IoT companies, not even pharma, are looking at. And federated learning is basically the notion that you can train the neural network at your premises, you being a big corp, right? And then you can teach it locally on thousands of data sets in the hospitals. So that essentially requires you to be able to identify these data sets in the very first place, then teach it locally on these thousands of siloed data sets that would be unobtainable otherwise, and then send it back to collide it together and to essentially arrive at the data model that you were looking at. So federated learning is the next trend, which I think will drive the innovation and drive sort of this new wave of how clinical data is used, because that is something that everyone is doing and everyone is trying to achieve right now. So, to wrap this up, I think it's essentially patient centricity, digitalization of patient engagement processes, being able to track and being able to identify otherwise fragmented and siloed data locally, right? Essentially maintaining the principle of, the data staying intact, right? So data staying local. These are the things that the industry is now trying to combine into one solution and trying to harmonize in a way.
Got it. Thanks, Sergey. And Andrew, back to wearable technology. I am a huge fan of my Fitbit, which I use all the time to track when I run and when I go and do my workouts and how I'm sleeping. And I do find it to be a great information source to make sure I'm staying healthy on that front. What do you predict will be some of the biggest innovations in that space if we were to jump 10 years into the future from now?
Yeah, great question. So I'll just have to kind of echo a little bit about Sergey's points around patient centricity and data collection, especially real world data. I think definitely what we see on our side on day-to-day basis is the number of different companies and governments, they approach us for that very reason, because there's just not enough good, reliable, real-time data that they can work with in of course in large quantities. So anyways, but that being said, I mean wearable devices. I mean, I also have my Garmin. I love that. But we still have, I think, a long way to go with these. I think we have this kind of this notion of calling them smart watches, but they're really not. They're actually pretty dumb still. And I mean, they're not actually all that different from say your treadmill. When you're running on your treadmill and you're taking your heart rate and body temperature, that way. I mean, I guess, watches are easier to, wear and carry, but that, they're not too different. And the reason for that is because, again, it's because data is being kept in silos. They're being kept in local environments, and so it really does limit the value that they could have, that you could derive from your various wearables and other IoT devices. So take our wearable, for example. Our wearable isn't different from Apple. We can do everything that Apple can Apple Watches can do from a health perspective, but Apple's watches doesn't do what cannot do what ours does, or rather, I should say, they choose not to, right? And it's simply because it's just the way Apple is. It's a closed system, and that's how that's their business model, right? So they probably won't change, at least not in the near future. Now, if you were to open it up, then it actually does. Open up the systems, and you're able to share the data. Then that does create a lot of more interesting innovations. I mean, you'd be able to, if you're wearing your Fitbit or my Garmin or whatnot, not only am I tracking my vitals, but if there's any kind of abnormalities or arrhythmias or whatnot, I could instantly, because it's integrated, say, with my medical records, my doctor or my robo doctor or digital doctor could potentially prescribe medicine or supplements automatically, right? So I think probably, just to go back to the original question, I think probably more the most important healthcare innovation that we probably will see is probably around, again, the connectivity and data sharing. That may not be as satisfying as an answer as you were looking for, but if just one more, I would probably just add to that. I know that Neuralinks that you had mentioned, that's really cool, and being able to implant in the brain, that's really kind of like Black Mirror meets Matrix kind of stuff. But I think from a wearable perspective, it's going to be things that are not invasive. One of the biggest challenges with wearables is compliance. It's the adoption. Take your own experience, for example. How often do you actually wear your wearable, your wrist device, while you're at home, or while you're sleeping, or while you're showering? Many of us probably don't. We probably take it off, and a lot of especially elderly people, they forget to put it back on, right? So probably where a lot of the more innovations that are going to come from a wearable perspective, it will be things that are going to feel like you don't have a wearable device, right? So it's going to probably be things like your clothes, maybe wearing a ring, and possibly, and then of course more, and by extension, IoT type devices. So in places that you didn't expect, on airlines, during immigration, or in your cars, for example, where you're going to be constantly monitoring your health vitals that way. Right. So.
Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I do think overall this question of data in terms of how we break out of the silos and how we basically are able to label all these real world data sets accurately and feed this into a Neuralink to make these predictions does seem to be able to be a key to unsource a lot of power. And it certainly seems, if to draw a parallel to the automotive industry, it does seem that in terms of creating fully autonomous vehicles at level 5, many do believe that we need that as much data as possible, correctly labeled, running through real world data sets on that. So very interesting. Anyway, we are now just past the hour mark here. So I want to thank all of our speakers for joining on this discussion today. Sergey, Jerry, Andrew, really appreciate you taking your time, introducing us to your ventures and also your thoughts on the future. And also thank you so much to all the participants who joined this today. Very much appreciate everyone's time, and I hope everyone has a great day and great evening wherever you are. Feel free to contact us. My email address is here, should you have any additional questions or would like to learn more about 500. So have a good day, good night, and good luck with everything.